Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyau Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra Sukhinas Santu, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet, Sarvastaratu Durgani, Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu, Sarvas Sadbuddhimapnotu, Sarvas Sarvatra Nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the Divine Presence can be felt most clearly in our hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato ma satkamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityorma amritam gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayate dakshinam mukham Tenamam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So in the last class, we saw in this chapter 17 the importance of Shraddha or faith, the deep faith. And we saw that the measure of who we are or what our worth is from a spiritual standpoint depends on what kind of faith we have, how deep a faith we have. And because our body and mind are made of material entities and matter has predominantly these three attributes of sattva, rajas, and tamas, our faith gets expressed or manifests in our lives in these three ways. So there is a faith which manifests as sattva, the faith which manifests as rajas, and faith which manifests as tamas. And what this chapter does predominantly, it gives a few examples of how these three manifestations occur. The verse that we are going to see now, verse number 4, shows how this faith influences the way we think of God, what kind of God we worship. And it will become clear. So let's read this verse 4 first. Yajante satvika devan yaksha rakshamsi rajasaha pretan bhutaganamshchanye yajante tamasa janaha. The Sattvika worship the gods, the Rajasika worship the Yakshas and Rakshasas, while others, the Tamasika men, worship spirits and goblins. So we have seen people worshipping different kinds of deities. And of course, although you might find these technical names here, Yakshas, Rakshasas, spirits, goblins, and so if you look up some of the commentaries, they might give you some explanation for these. It's enough for our purpose to recognize that even among those who believe in God, they all worship God, they all pray to God, but God is such a generic term. And so when someone says, I'm praying to God, we kind of have a sense this person is praying to a being that in that person's mind has a certain characteristic. Let me explain. For instance, we know from our own experience that the word God itself doesn't really mean much, just a word. But when we think of God, we need some concrete supports to think. And those supports usually involve either a form and or qualities. I mean, how else? For instance, now, if you are asked, think of space, and what can you think? How can you think of space? Even if you think of infinity. Now, infinity is a word. How can you think of infinity? The most that many of us may try to do, think of this vast sky or a big ocean. So we are still using something a bit more concrete to grasp an abstract idea of infinity. Exactly in the same way, God is a pretty abstract entity. Now, if I have to use my mind to grasp what God means, I will need something a little bit more concrete. And the mind usually deals with form and qualities. And that's why it's possible to say that there are at least three broad divisions in which God is thought of. One is God with form and with qualities. So many of the Hindu devas and devis, gods and goddesses, they will find whether it's Vishnu or Shiva or Parvati and Krishna and Rama. So they have a form, and there are life stories associated with it. There are qualities, and many of them have lots of stories connected with it. So not only, stories can include a family. So you have, say, Shiva and Parvati, and then their children, Ganesha and Kartik, and so on. Now, all of these associations we have help us kind of get hold of that pretty abstract thing called God. So that's one way, that when we try to think of God, we either try to think of some form. No, it's not just a random form, although some people try to do like that. But what we will see is that oftentimes that believers or people who have a spiritual inclination, when they try to think of God, although there are any number of possibilities, usually we will find that certain kinds of forms, certain kinds of qualities resonate more than certain others. And because people are different, not everyone is attracted to the same form and the same quality. And so that's why different people have different ideas of how to visualize, how to conceptualize, how to think of God. And that specific form, or that specific quality, or those set of qualities which resonate with me become my chosen form of the deity. And the Sanskrit word for that is Ishta. So whenever then I try to meditate or worship or pray, it becomes so much easy for me then to think of God in a form and a quality that completely resonates with my own aspirations, with my own way of thinking. And so that's one way of thinking of God, with form, with qualities. Now, not everyone is tuned to forms. Some people find, oh, if God is infinite, how can I give a specific form? And then some traditions, thinking of giving something a form itself gets looked down upon. It's considered a form of idolatry. And so they say, no forms. But qualities are okay. And so some people, therefore, prefer to think of God not in any specific form, but qualities. Say, as God is love, God is kindness, God is just. And so that's one other way of thinking of God. God has qualities, but no form. First was qualities and form. And the third way of thinking of God is beyond both, beyond qualities and beyond form. In Sanskrit, the first one is called Saguna Sakara Akara is form. So Sakara means with form, Saguna means with qualities. The second is Nirakar, that is without form, but Saguna, with qualities. And a third is Nirguna, that is without attributes, and Nirakar, without form. That God is a completely transcendent aspect of the divine. Now, while these are the three broad categories, even among qualities, which are the kind of qualities in God that I am most attracted to? And that again will change from a person to person. Although it is often said that God created us in His image, another way of looking at that statement is that we create God in our image. By that is meant, we are not really creating God, but because God is infinite being, transcendent, beyond the reach of our mind and senses. And with our limited minds and senses, when we try to grasp it, how we grasp it tells us more about ourselves than about God. It's a little bit like the example that sometimes is given. Swami Vivekananda refers to it in his lectures on Jnana Yoga. Is this, that suppose it's getting dusk, the sun has set, it hasn't become pitch dark yet, kind of a semi-darkness, a partial light, if you like. And there is this big pillar, about say 5 feet high, a kind of a stump of a tree, if you like, which is right there. So it's darkness, and you see this kind of a straight someone. Now, if a thief is going by that way, just gone and stolen something somewhere, and suddenly sees it, what the thief is, oh my God, there may be a cop standing there. And this person will try to avoid that and go take some other road. If, let's say, someone is going to meet a friend, and his friend is expected to be waiting somewhere in that area, this person sees that same block of the stump of a tree or whatever, and says, oh, my friend may be there. Again, depending on our needs, we will project whatever it is that we are either afraid of, or it is something that we are expecting, or something that we like onto that thing. But it's just a pillar. Exactly in the same way, God is who God is. That's why sometimes we read in the Bible, I am that I am. God is just who God is. Now, when I try to understand God, I'm trying to see God through the lenses of my mind. And therefore, what I see will be my version of God. That's why sometimes when I meet with people who say, I don't believe in God, I don't think God exists. And I often ask them, well, that's great, but which kind of God you don't believe in? And that often kind of stumps them. Because if you don't believe in something, you'll have to describe what kind of a God you don't believe in. And oftentimes they end up telling me what kind of God they don't believe in. And I end up telling, well, I don't believe in that kind of God either. So that's one way it goes. But whether we affirm the existence of God, or whether we deny the existence of God, we are affirming or denying something, and that something is more a projection of our own mind. Because everything that we see, not just about God, even the world that we see, is a projection of our mind. So it's like this. There may be this same one person. Well, you can see that. We just had this election which is concluded. It could be just one person. And there's some people would vote that one person, and some people won't. Those people who vote that person say, this person is the best person. This is the person who's is a great one. And the one who don't vote that person, like, no, this is bad. Now that person is whoever that person is. But it's the projections of the people who either like that person or don't like it, and have these either positive or negative impressions about it. So a lot of the impressions we carry about the people that we meet in life
may be objectively true or may not be, but they are definitely the way I'm able to see and judge that person through the lens of my own mind. Same thing is true with regard to our understanding of God as well. So, what this verse points out is depending on whether it is the sattva that is predominant in me, the rajas which is predominant in me, or tamas which is predominant in me, that is the kind of God I will naturally want to worship. So if my God, let's say, is a very angry God, for instance, if I think of, oh, if I don't do this, my God is going to get really angry with me and then throw me into the hell. Or if I do this and my God, then I will say, God, please go and kill my enemies, and God will go and kill my enemies for me. Now, I'm conceiving of God who is prone to violence or prone to anger, because that's the way, and I worship because I feel that's the kind of God that my mind naturally is attracted towards. And so that's really essentially what is being pointed out here, that our concept of God will be influenced by whichever of these gunas is predominant in me. And that's what is meant by sattvika worship the gods. Now here, apart from the technical terms, by here is meant the sattva people will worship the divine who will be predominantly manifesting sattva qualities. The kind of what are the qualities we normally associate with sattva? Say, calmness, love, understanding, justice. So if that's the kind of God, then those are the qualities that are predominant in me. If there is a lot of anger in my heart, or a hatred or fear, then I will want to worship a divine who will somehow respond or try to do something to free me from my fear, or try to find an outlet for my anger or for my hatred, and so on. So that's what is meant here. The Sattvika worship the gods, the Rajasic worship the Yakshas and the Rakshasas, and the Tamasika worship spirits and goblins. So that's essentially the idea. Verse 5 and 6, we'll do it together. Ashastra vihitam ghoram tapyante ye tapo janaha dambhahankara sanyuktaha kamaragabalanvitaha karshayanta sharirastham bhutagramam achetasaha mam chaivanta sharirastham tan vidya sura nishchayan. Those men who practice severe austerities not enjoined by the scriptures, being given to ostentation and self-conceit, possessed of desire, attachment and pertinacity, and senseless, torture the elements in the body, as also me residing within it, know them to be of demoniac resolves. We have seen this in the earlier chapter also, that people who have these daivi qualities and these asuri, demoniac qualities. And so he points out in these two verses the characteristics of some people who in their mind feel that they are doing something very spiritual or something very religious. But that kind of religiosity might involve severe austerities not enjoined by the scriptures. So sometimes we can, and people do, create their own practice, which may not have any scriptural sanction. It's a little bit like, in itself, there may not be anything wrong with this. You know, people why should people always have to follow a book? That's I think a valid way of looking at it. The the advantage in following a book, because the scripture is not simply a book. A scripture is a record of methods which are time tested. In other words, there are people before me who have practiced the things which are in the scriptures. And if those things had not worked, if those things were not effective, they would not be a part of the scripture anymore. So the advantage in following the instructions given in a scripture is that it's tested. It's a little bit like if you're flying, let's say, and they say, well, this is the first flight, and this is the completely new model, but it hasn't been tested. And I think many of us might hesitate to just use a machinery or to get into a car or a flight which has never been tested. It's like, well, you take your pick. On the other hand, if we know, well, people have gone in this flight before, you know it works, then you feel much more assured of it. I mean, think about it. We do read about plane crashes. We do read about car accidents, but that doesn't stop us from using it. Not because there is no risk involved, but we just know that compared to the times in which it just works fine and the times in which it breaks down, the chances of me reaching my destination safely are much better than my plane crashing. Because if this faith had not been there, I would never have gotten inside a plane. So when we know that something works, when we see that it has worked in the case of other people, then our faith gets strengthened. Now, the advantage in following what the scripture says is we know that whatever is there in it, especially if the scripture is old, especially if it's been there for long. The Gita has been around now for at least 3,000 years. And so we know that whatever is in it, in this 3,000 years, generations of people have studied it, tried to live according to it, and have become enlightened. So we know it works. Now, a person would say, let me just do what it works. But there are some others like, I don't believe in any books. I'm going to do whatever I want, which is fine. But if that's what they want to do, then they have to take the risks that come along with it. Then there is no one to blame because, well, I chose to do this. So that's what he's pointing out. People who practice severe austerities not enjoined by scriptures. And oftentimes, the purpose of doing that could be ostentation and self-conceit. Sometimes people might do something unusual just because they want to do something unusual. But just as often, sometimes people do something unusual in order to show other people, I'm doing something unusual. So they want to stand out from the crowd. If multitudes are doing something in one way, I'm going to do something different because then I will stand out. Otherwise, I'll be just one among the many. And that's what is meant by this self-ostentation and self-conceit. So a lot of times people may want to do this kind of severe austerities, not enjoined by any scripture, but just in order to stand out, to show off, to show that I am someone special. And such people are often possessed with desire, attachment, pertinacity, and often senseless. What Krishna is saying is such people, and what he's referring to here is often the kind of austerity that require torturing one's own body. Of self-mortification, you might have read about these things. That there were people who felt that this body is the abode of all sin, and the only way to bring it under control is to punish it. And so you may have heard about this whole, what's it called, self-flagellation. You have this whipping and kind of torturing the body, and it was felt that if I do this, then I'm doing something spiritual because the body is sinful, and by punishing the body, I'm doing it. And what Krishna says here, such people torture the elements in the body, clearly, the elements are being tortured, and also me, since the divine resides within the body. By torturing the body and the mind, we're also torturing the divine being within it. And such people who do this belong to this demoniac nature. Verse 7. Aharastvapi sarvasya trividho bhavati priyaha yajñas tapas tatha danam tesham bhedamimam shrunu. The food also liked by each is threefold, as also sacrifice, austerity, and gift. Listen about these distinctions among them. So in the following verses now, Krishna will show how the food that such people eat, the sacrifice or the worship they do, the austerities they practice, the kind of gifts they give, how these vary depending on which of the gunas are predominant in their mental makeup. Verse 8. Ayus sattva balarogya sukha priti vivardhanaha rasya snigdha sthira hridya ahara satvika priyaha. So here he describes the food which people of sattvika nature love to eat. The foods that augment life, energy, strength, health, happiness, and joy, and which are savory, oleaginous, that means soft, nourishing, and agreeable, are liked by the sattvikas. Now, this is a kind of a very generic description. So that people who are sattvic by nature will generally tend to like these food, which augment life, by augment life is meant which are good for health foods, because which will normally we believe, and science seems to agree with it, that if we have a healthy diet, that will prolong our life. And so that is what is meant by that augment life, energy, which give energy, strength, health, happiness, and joy, and which are savory. Savory sometimes can be also translated as juicy, soft, nourishing, agreeable, are liked by sattvika. Sometimes people ask, is it possible to find a health food which is agreeable? I think someone remarked long back that nothing makes me so sick as health foods. And that was said jokingly. But by and large, if junk foods were tasteless and terrible, no one would eat them. So clearly, that there is market for junk food is partly because it at least seems to be tasty, but that it's not something that might augment life, energy, strength, and so on. So this is the kind of food sattvika people eat, which other words, if we want to kind of translate this verse in our own mind, what it means is, if I consciously make an effort to eat these kind of foods, I will be increasing the sattva element within my personality. So when it is a sattva, it's not that sattva people drop down from the sky and start eating these foods. What it meant is, if and when I will start eating these kind of foods, the sattva element within me will keep on increasing. Next, about the Rajasika people. Verse 9. Katvam la lavanatyukshna तीक्ष्ण रूक्ष विदाहिनः आहारा राजसस्येष्टा दुःख शोकामय प्रदाः. The foods that are very bitter, sour, saltish, hot, pungent, dry and burning are likened by the Rajasika and are productive of pain, grief and disease. Now clearly, again, take it in the context in which these words are spoken. It's not that immediately you take something bitter and sour, immediately you're going to have pain, grief and disease. That's not the idea. But too much of these things, see, it's like this life, as Krishna has already said in other place, that everything has a place in life. Every kind of food has a place in life. In fact, sometimes they speak about Navarasas, the nine or seven, I'm not confused. There are 9 or 7 kinds of tastes, distinct tastes. Just a few days ago, on BBC, there was, I think there's some laboratory in UK which said that they have found one more taste, which is distinct from the taste that we have. And there's some research going on. And then there was a discussion about, well, how do you determine which is a different taste? Now, we don't have to go into technicalities, but it's enough to know that traditionally, there are these 7 or 9 specific tastes. And sometimes they say for a good balanced meal would be that every meal should have something which provides something for these different taste buds, for these different 7 or 9 tastes. So this is not to say something bitter, sour, saltish is bad or anything like that, but that these kind of foods are predominantly liked by people who have a more of rajas in them. Now, just because sattva is praised so much in spiritual life, don't think that in itself rajas is bad or tamas is bad. It's just that it does something very different from sattva does. Sometimes even in order to, if rajas is the principle of activity, or a firm, how would we say, a firm desire to do something and go, and then we need that kind of thing in spiritual life. Of course, you need sattva, that's true. But you also need rajas to say, yes, beginning tomorrow, I'm going to meditate regularly. I'm going to spend so much time in the morning, such time in the evening. I'm going to do these regular studies or whatever it is. Even in order to make that kind of resolve and push oneself to kind of push the boundary, you need a little bit of rajas. So don't think that sattva alone is very spiritual and the rajas is something bad. It just depends on which direction I'm pushing my rajasika tendencies, in which direction I'm pushing my even tamasika tendencies. That's what Ramakrishna meant when he said, you just turn their direction. Even tamas. Now, tamas could be oftentimes described as kind of an inertia, oftentimes described as very destructive. Now even tamas can be made spiritual. So rather than go about doing something destructive in the world around us or doing in the lives of people around us, what I can say is, well, suppose anger is something that I'm struggling with, or some other weakness that I'm struggling with. So what I can say is, I'm going to get rid of this weakness from my heart. I'm going to destroy this anger in my heart. I'm going to destroy this hatred in my heart. That's the language of a tamasic person. So we can use, if there is tamas in me, I can turn that tamasika tendency towards something helpful in my own spiritual life. And I want to make that clear because sometimes we might think, when we mention these three gunas, that sattva is great, but the other two are bad. So don't think in terms of good or bad here. So those people who have a predominance of rajas in them, they like these kind of foods. And sometimes you will see, if there's any day you are feeling particularly lazy or just don't feel like doing anything, just feel like just lying around, then try eating something extremely bitter or saltish or something very pungent. You just feel like getting up and doing something. Well, try it and see. But that's what sometimes people have said. So third, verse number 10. What are the kind of foods that people in whom tamas is predominant like? Yatayamam gatarasam puti paryushitam chayat uchishtam apicha medhyam bhojanam tamasapriyam. The food that is pretty cold, by cold is really meant in a sense of stale. Worthless, meaning tasteless. Putrid often means kind of foul smelling. Stale, that is, here it's used in the sense of almost like on the point of being decomposed. Sometimes you will see something, especially in summer, and if you have not put it in the refrigerator, just kind of left it out, some of the foods will then will not be edible anymore. And impure is likened by tamasika. So if my predominant interest is eating foods of this kind, that means tamas is strong in me. So what these three verses that we have seen shows that the function of gunas in our lives is so strong that it also determines the kind of foods that we like and the kind of foods that we are attracted to, or the kind of foods that we try to avoid. So we will stop here. And going forward, as we have seen that he will describe the different kind of sacrifices, the different kind of charities, and so on, how the three gunas manifest in these different activities. So if you have any thoughts, ideas, questions about what we have seen.
Namaskar Maharaj. This is regarding the fourth verse that we spoke. The sattva worship gods, rajasika worship the yakshas, and tamasika worship the rakshasas. I have a different interpretation on this, but like I'm not sure if it is right or wrong. So forgive me if it is wrong. Let's say like today, technically there are people who don't worship. There are no people who worship yakshas or rakshasas. It's like almost everyone of us like worship the gods in some or the other form. At this point, like let's say like if I want to bring this to the human level, at the human level, at some point of time, every one of us will get influenced with some or the other personality. At a human level, at some point of time, every one of us will get influenced with some or the other person or the personality. So let's say like we get influenced with divine personality, someone like, or a person of divine character, or someone like you, or someone like, and there are people who get
Yaksha or Rakshasa?
No, divine.
Okay,
It's divinity. And there are some people who get influenced by business magnates, or someone who is of worldly pursuits, or like name, fame, and everything. There are some people who get influenced with the criminal ideas, criminologies, and everything. So if our mind, or else like if we are getting with influence with one of these three personalities, I think like we can determine in what character we have it.
Sure. I think I like that. It's possible to see that when we use the word God or when we use the word worship, oftentimes we all everyone looks above the clouds, but that doesn't have to be. I mean, there are people who may not think of, when they think of, think about it this way. What do most of us do when we think of God or worship? We think of a source which gives us protection, which gives us love, which really gives us what we are looking for. And if that source is transcendent, we'll use the word God. But for many people, they might just look upon some person from history, or maybe their own grandfather, or maybe I was about to say your congressman.
Trump.
Again, there may be some powerful person in one's area who might be very loving, very kind, who may be able to give me what I want. And while I may not go and worship that person the way a person might do in a temple, but pretty much my faith and my adoration and my everything, the way I speak with that person will be kind of a prayer. Oh, you please come, please do this. And we see that there are these people holding positions of power in the social or political field. And there are people who go to them, and they're almost like people in olden days, when they were in the presence of a king, the kind of surrender and things were not very different from a religious person might go to a temple and do it. So that's true. And again, some people might go and worship, say, a mafia don, and say, please, could you please go, and I have this trouble, and that mafia person might do something in a very destructive kind of way. But that probably might come among these bhuta pretas and kind of a very destructive kind of a thing. So it's possible to think about it that way. So I like the way of thinking. Good. Okay.
Swamiji, I think we are looking at different kind of food influencing different kind of sattva or guna. Is the guna is it in the body, mind, or where are these gunas? Are they come in? If we are spirit, how can we influence spirit with doing all the such things?
No, the guna is not in the spirit. The spirit is beyond the guna. The guna is the characteristics of both body and mind. The guna is there in all material things, and the body and the mind are material. So the body and mind, by their very nature, is influence of all these three gunas. You cannot separate the body and mind from the gunas, and the spirit is never touched by the gunas. So yes, of course you are spirit. As spirit, you are beyond gunas. But right now, we don't move about and don't remember, hardly ever remember that we are spirit. And so as long as we see ourselves as body and mind, we are in the grip of the gunas.
So by following particular food, we are actually trying to remember spirit?
No, what it says is certain kinds of food. So if you kind of eat the foods that are mentioned here, for instance, the food that are described for sattva, this thing, that will activate the sattva qualities in you. That will increase the sattva tendency in you. If I eat more of the tamasic food, it will increase the tamasic tendencies in me. In other words, for spiritual seekers, I must try to eat as much of the sattvic food as possible. And whatever rajas and tamas are there in me, I must try to change their direction. Use that power of rajas and power of tamas towards in a spiritual direction. And to the extent the sattva becomes predominant in me, the others will automatically kind of get subdued. That's the idea.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Swamiji, I'm just going back to that three gunas. So even the God who we worship, we have our own frame, and we try to fit our God in that frame, and that's how we worship. So it's not the God's character. It's we create the character that God should be like that. And it's the same way we create a monster or whoever. So it's everything is within us. Our interest, whatever samskara we do, so we can change our samskara and do. So God is nothing but within us, and monster is also within us.
Sure, yep. That's true, very true.
Hi Swamiji. About the food, basically. So beef, bacon, like what category does non-vegetarian food come in?
What category does?
This non-vegetarian food,
Huh.
does it come in sattvic food or rajas or in what?
Well, if it is putrid, stale, and it's sitting, it will be tamasic. If it is if it's very fresh, perhaps rajasic, because it's very high protein. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, but it just seems to me that it probably might go into rajasic, and if it's not very fresh, it probably might be tamasic.
Yeah, my basically question is about non-vegetarian and vegetarian food. So.
Yeah, you see, I mean, that's a long discussion, but the line separating vegetarian and non-vegetarian is not very clear. Yeah, so that's essentially it. Because that's why you have these different categories. There is a category called vegan as opposed to vegetarian. So again, dairy product, are dairy products truly vegetarian or not? So it's a very ambiguous demarcation. So people should be free, in my opinion, to eat whatever they like, whatever they can digest, and whatever agrees with them. And if they don't like to eat something, they don't have to eat it. I think, as I said, the food definitely influences us, both physically and mentally. There is no doubt about it. But sometimes too much focus on food and not on other things in life kind of skews the picture. So while food is an important part in religious life, it must be taken in a total context. Because as I sometimes say, that people eating vegetarian food is great, but that itself is no guarantee that it will make person spiritual. Just as eating a non-vegetarian food is no guarantee that itself is enough to make a person a very worldly person. So food has influence on us. In order for us to even to feel the influence of food, we need to acquire some amount of sensitivity. Because if that sensitivity is not there, it really doesn't matter what we eat. And in order to acquire that sensitivity, a sufficient amount of purity of heart should have been acquired. And that purity of heart comes not simply through eating food. That purity of heart comes through a conscious practice of being unselfish, of being kind, of doing work in a spirit of karma yoga, helping those who are in need. So these are the ways in which the mind gets refined. And when the mind gets refined, it will reach a point, at some point, then I will know instinctively whether this food is good for my spiritual life or not. Right now, we don't have that sensitivity, which is not to say that we should be careless about food. But it's good to recognize that food has a place in spiritual life, but we must recognize what that place is. Either underestimating it or overestimating it, both are problematic. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Swamiji, speaking of context, given the current climate after the election. There's a tremendous upheaval and suffering at what feels like at the dark ages. How can we as spiritual seekers use the pain and suffering of this present moment as it relates to the political and social climate to connect more deeply with our higher power?
Sure. Yeah, when we look around, we recognize that there are certain things outside that we can control and certain things that we can't control. So if it is possible for me to change the external in some way, I should try to do it. But if I recognize that, well, this is being operated by a force which is much bigger, much beyond me, then the first thing I have to do is, can I protect myself first? Can I somehow insulate myself from some of the destructive vibes going around? Because if I protect myself, then I may be in a position to then help some others protect themselves. That's why when we fly, they say that when the oxygen mask drop, you first put one for yourself before helping the person next to you. So I think that's what, as spiritual seekers, we need to do. And it's not just at this kind of a present juncture. It's I think, all the time. Because there will always be influences in this world which may not be wholesome, which may not be healthy, and over which I may not have any control. I may not be able to stop it. The world is just too big for you and me to go and change it. But what we can do is be sufficiently strong to not allow negativities to enter into me. I think that kind of an armor, if you like, we should be able to develop in it. That's what we can do.
And Swamiji, can we apply the examples given were of food for the sattvic, rajas, and tamasic, but it seems as though that would apply to action, thoughts. The putrid would be tamas, energetic could be.
Sure.
So we could apply it across all objects.
Yeah. Sure, that's true. Okay, last one. Yeah.
Okay, regarding his question regarding whether the non-veg comes into rajas or the sattva, I was hearing to one of the commentary, and the same question was asked there. The commentator said is that the vegetarian foods or the plants has only one indriya, and while the non-veg in its original form has all the 5 indriyas or the 5 senses embedded in it. So in the sattva character, like the senses will be much in control. So the plants have only one indriyas, and their influence on us will be much less. So and the non-veg has 5 senses, which has more influence on us. So that will definitely come into rajas. That is what this answer was. But I'm definitely not sure. So.
Who is sure? I mean, see, we don't know. When you eat a potato or when you eat something which is whether a vegetable or an animal, what they are feeling or whether they are feeling anything, there's no way to know. So different commentators may have different explanations on it, but since it cannot be objectively verified, I just try to look at everything from a subjective standpoint, because that's what Swamiji said, that as Vedantins, we must always try to see everything from a subjective standpoint. And that I find is more helpful, that what kind of an effect it has on me and what I should do. All the time keeping in mind the basic principles of the Gita, that these are not violated. So we stop here today, and when we meet next week, we will begin with verse number 11. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme tayo shritva pranamami muhurmuhu. Bow down to Ramakrishna and Shraddha Devi again and again. On Sunday, our subject will be doing dialogue. That for satsang on Sunday at 11. Next Wednesday, we will continue the study of the Gita. And on Tuesday and Saturday, our Arati and meditation will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.